Hey guys, so with the LCS 8 that concluded the past weekend, we saw Virtual World take the Yu-Gi-Oh! World by storm and show off its potential. As I have access to all deck lists for the event since I'm partnered with Luxury Gaming, I went through all of the 23 Virtual World lists at the tournament to map out the most common ratios of the core cards, most common extra deck monsters, hand traps, and staples. And I also recently did an interview with Pac regarding his second place Virtual World list, so make sure to check that out as well if you want to play this deck. So if you like these kind of videos, then make sure to like and subscribe so that I know these videos are worthwhile to create. And also, make sure to check out my analytical breakdown of the top cut at LCS 8 that's on Luxury Gaming's YouTube channel, and I'll link that below. Finally, I know some of you may be inclined to just skip over and look through all the images in these videos and call it a day, but just be aware that I'll be speaking to a lot of data that's not in the visuals, so make sure to stick around to get the full picture. So let's get started. So we know that Virtual World had the highest representation at LCS 8 with 23 decks, and 7 of them made it to top 16, meaning that they had a 30% conversion rate. There were actually 3 more Virtual World decks that were in the top 32, so it definitely had a strong showing. And if you followed the event, you would know that by the time we got to top 4, 3 of them were Virtual World, and the other deck being Noble Knights, and the final matchup was a Virtual World mirror match. Now, of the 23 Virtual World lists at the event, about 78% or 18 of 23 decks played a 40 card list, and then there were a few more that were 41 to 42 cards and one list that was 50 cards. So let's go over the most common ratios of the core Virtual World cards. So Lulu, Lao Lao, and Lili were all played at 3 by every Virtual World list at the event. Gigi was almost consensus as well, being played at 3 in all but one list, which played Gigi at 2. But once we get to Nyan Nyan, there was a bit of a divide, so 65% of the list played Nyan Nyan at 3 and the rest played it at 2. And now if we were to look at the 7 list that made it to top cut, then 6 of 7 actually played Nyan Nyan at 3, so something to consider there. As for the spells, Kowloon and Kinglong, all 23 decks played it at 3, but with the Trap Shush, 87% played it at 3 and the rest played it at 2. But again, if you look at the top cut list, then 6 of 7 of them played Shush at 3. So now let's go over the extra deck monsters, and I'm going to start off with True King of All Calamities and Cloud Castle because they were the only extra deck monsters where their ratio differed between the lists. So now first off, both of these cards were played in all 23 lists of course, but 70% of the list played VFD at 2, while the rest just played it at 1. And in top cut, 5 of the 7 lists played VFD at 2. Again, I recommend you watch my interview with Pac where he talks about why he played 2 VFDs. And then as for Cloud Castle, 30% of the list played it at 2 while the rest played it at just 1. And if you look at the all 7 topping list, they played it at just 1 as well. Now the remaining extra deck monsters I'm going to show you, they were all just played at 1. Let's look at the Virtual World specific extra deck monsters first. So Shen Shen, the Walking Macro Cosmos, was played in all 23 decks, and Juju, which can send a card on the field, was played in most decks as well at 91%. And Fan Fan, the one that can banish a face-up card your opponent controls and in either player's graveyard, was relatively popular, being seen in 74% of the list, while Jaja, which can banish an opponent's monster at battles, was not very popular, being seen on only 4 of the 23 lists. Some of the other key extra deck monsters that were widely seen in most lists include the Big Croco and the Stardust Charge Warrior that were seen in all lists, and Coral Dragon that was seen in all but one list. AA Zeus was also seen in most of the Virtual World lists as well at 91%, and all 7 decks in Top Cut played AA Zeus. And of course, there's plenty of other extra deck monsters that were seen in the 23 Virtual World lists, so anything with at least 5 decks playing them, I put them in a table here, although I've also featured some of them in the visual you see to the right, and you can just pause here if you're interested in taking a closer look at the table. I guess to highlight some of these monsters, we see Bamboozling Gossip Shadow being seen in less than half of the Virtual World lists at this event. I know it was a card that would, help stop Nibiru in this deck, although it seemed like they essentially just play through Nibiru and set up a VFD anyways. And then you have a card like Gotham's as well for that hand loop action, although it was only seen in 5 of the list. And some other cards that were rarely seen but I can mention include something like Side Frame Lord Omega, Geomathmech Final Sigma, and Jinzo Layered. Now while I'll be going over the most common staples later, I wanted to separate out the most common spells that were played in the main deck in these lists. So we see that all of the lists played Pot of Desires, and all but one played E-Teleport as well. And Triple Tactics Talent and Foolish Burial Goods were also common occurrences at 65% and 57% respectively, and I know Pac talked about how last minute he replaced his TTTs with Foolish Burial Goods. Upstart Goblin was seen in less than half of the decks as well. Alright, so now we can move on to talking about the most common hand traps played in Virtual World at LCS 8. And before we begin, just a quick overview in that the number of hand traps in the main in these lists range from 0 to 11, with a median of 6 hand traps, so they don't really play a ton. And if you look at it from a proportion point of view, then the proportion of hand traps relative to the main deck size range from 0 to 27.5%, with a median of 15%. Now, those of you familiar with my channel will have seen these type of graphics already, but for those of you that are new, to interpret the figures, basically with Nibiru for example, we see that 21 of 23 decks played Nibiru, where 10 of them played Nibiru in the main and 11 played in the side. So dark blue means the main deck and light blue means the side deck. Ashe was very common too at 19 decks, all played in the main. I have this asterisk here because one list, Pax actually, played 2 Ashe in the main and 1 Ashe in the side, but for the purpose of this graphic, I categorized it as main deck only so that I don't double count things. Then we have Gamma played in 18 decks, which I thought would actually be a bit higher. And then we have Lancia at 16 decks, all played in the side, and then Imperm in 9 decks with a pretty even split in terms of being played in the main and the side. Token Collector was pretty popular too at 8 decks, and followed by No Material and Ghost Ogre being seen in 4 and 3 decks respectively. There were also Effect Veiler, DD Crow, and Droll and Lockbird being seen in 1 deck each. Now to cover the other common staples, which of course this won't include the spells like Desires or TTT that I already showed before. So Harpy's Feather Adjuster was seen in all but 2 Virtual World decks, with 1 even main decking it. Pankratops was quite popular as well, seen in 17 decks with 1 main decking it as well. Twin Twisters was really popular, and Pac talks about this in my interview. For example, shotgunning in standby phase can really hurt prank kids with their Pandemonium, as well as decks that play Shadal Schism for example. Red Reboot and Skill Drain were seen in half of the decks, and Skill Drain was actually seen in 5 of the 7 top cut lists as well. Lastly, some other common staples included Imperial Order and Call by the Grave, the latter of which was mainly used in the main deck. And then we actually had Gamma Seal in 6 decks, with 3 decks even main decking the Kaiju. And lastly, we have Lightning Storm and Alpha, the Master Beast, that saw some decent representation in the Virtual World list. Alright guys, so that's it for the assessment of the 23 Virtual World lists at LCS 8. Hope you found that useful. If you like this kind of video, let me know and I can continue to do it moving forward. It takes a lot of time to go through the list and analyze it and all, but I think it's definitely worth it if it can be helpful to people who want to pick up the deck. Anyways, that's it for me guys. Take care.